Hi, this is James from IELTS United, and we are continuing to work through the IELTS test books. This video is about Test Book 9, Test 2, Listening, Section 3. If you want to listen to the previous section, click here. As always, this is a new test for me. I haven't seen this test before, I haven't heard the audio, so we're going to do the test together, and I will explain to you how I'm thinking about what we hear, and hopefully you will learn some tips, tricks and advice to help you do well in your IELTS listening section as well. So, let's begin.
Section 3. You will hear the Director of Studies in an English Language Centre and a student representative talking about their self-access centre. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24.
Okay, we have some time to read through the questions. So the first thing that you notice is that this is multiple choice. Choose the correct letter A, B or C. So very important to read this because you only need to choose one. This is section 3 of the IELTS listening, so we know that it's going to be an interaction between two people, or maybe a third person speaking also, and it's usually about training or education. So this might be, for example, a talk between two students and a lecturer, but actually we can see this is about a self-access centre. So this is about some kind of learning centre. Let's read through the questions and think about how we might answer them. Students want to keep the self-access centre because, so it's an interaction between students and teachers, and they enjoy the variety of equipment, so we can start to think about synonyms. So a synonym for variety is different kinds, a synonym for equipment is resources. They like being able to work on their own, so to work independently, or it is an important part of their studies. Okay, so a synonym for important might be vital, and remember also sometimes that IELTS do make this difficult. Sometimes they say what it isn't, so we also need to be aware that it could be the opposite of these different things. Question 22 says, some teachers would prefer to close the self-access centre, move the self-access centre somewhere else. Okay, so to relocate would be a good synonym for that, or restrict access to the self-access centre. So we might hear that they only want people to be able to access it or go to it when there's someone there, for example. Question 23 says, the student's main concern about using the library would be, so what's a synonym for concern? Maybe their worry. And what about main? Their primary worry would be another way to describe this. So their main concern would be the size of the library, the difficulty in getting help, so think of phrases that are similar to difficulty, like trouble, and the lack of materials. And a good synonym for materials is resources, so not having enough would be another way to say the lack of. Alright, and finally, 24, the Director of Studies is concerned or worried about the cost of upgrading the centre, so any words related to money, numbers, finance, the cost of upgrading. So what does upgrading mean? It means to make it better. The lack of space in the centre, so there might not be room, or the difficulty in supervising the centre. Okay, so when a supervisor is available, and you might also think about who would be supervising, so we can listen for keywords like teachers, supervisors, or staff. Okay, let's listen to the tape together and see what answers we get.
Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
Hi, Ewan. As you know, I've asked you here today to discuss the future of our self-access centre. We have to decide what we want to do about this very important resource for our English language students. So, can you tell me what the students think about this?
Well, from the students' point of view, we would like to keep it. The majority of students say that they enjoy using it because it provides a variation on the classroom routine, and they see it as a pretty major component of their course. But we would like to see some improvements to the equipment, particularly the computers. There aren't enough for one each at the moment, and we always have to share.
Well, yes, the teachers agree that it is a very valuable resource, but one thing we have noticed is that a lot of the students are using it to check their personal emails. We don't want to stop you students using it, but we think the computers should be used as a learning resource, not for emails. Some of us also think that we could benefit a lot more by relocating the Self-Access Centre to the main university library building. How do you think the students would feel about that, Yun?
Well, the library is big enough to incorporate the Self-Access Centre, but it wouldn't be like a class activity anymore. Our main worry would be not being able to go to a teacher for advice. I'm sure there would be plenty of things to do, but we really need teachers to help us choose the best activities.
Well, there would still be a teacher present and he or she would guide the activities of the students. We wouldn't just leave them to get on with it.
Yes, but I think the students would be much happier keeping the existing setup. They really like going to the Self-Access Centre with their teacher and staying together as a group to do activities. If we could just improve the resources and facilities, I think it would be fine. Is the cost going to be a problem?
It's not so much the expense that I'm worried about, and we've certainly got room to do it, but it's the problem of timetabling a teacher to be in there outside class hours. If we're going to spend a lot of money on equipment and resources, we really need to make sure that everything is looked after properly. Anyway, let's make some notes to see just what needs doing to improve the centre.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30.
Okay, so we learned that this was about English students speaking with their supervisors and teachers, and they were discussing the possibility of moving or upgrading the Self-Access Centre where students learn English. We also had either an Australian or New Zealand accent, so that was quite interesting, and we heard that some of the predictions we made regarding the vocabulary were quite useful. Let's continue.
Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
Okay, we have some time to look at 25 to 30, so let's see what we have now. Complete the notes below. Okay, so we're filling in notes. This is very important. Write no more than 2 words for each answer. It's a very frequent mistake that students will write too much and end up not getting the answer right for that reason. So, necessary improvements to the existing Self-Access Centre. Equipment. Replace the computers to create more space. Okay. Resources. The level of the something materials in particular should be more clearly shown. Okay, so it's got a definite article here, the, so we know we're looking for a noun, and a noun that collocates with materials. So it could be learning materials, study materials, something like that. Here we've got update the something collection. So think to yourself, what kind of collection would they want to update in a self-access English learning centre? So it could be tapes, DVDs, resources, it could be books or exam and test papers. So you're listening for anything that might make up a collection in an English learning centre. Number 27, buy some and divide them up. So what could they buy and divide up amongst the students? So the same things as we just discussed that we could separate between the students. It could be books, DVDs, resources, tapes, anything that you might use in an English learning centre. And then use of the room. So we're thinking about the space now. Speaks to the teachers and organise a something for supervising the centre. So why would you speak to the teachers to organise something to supervise the centre in the room? What could they create, or who could they employ? So it could be a person, so it might be organise another member of staff, a supervisor. It could also be something that they create together like a schedule. So listen for words related to those topics. And then install and, okay, so we've got the indefinite article. It's an, which tells us that the next word begins with a vowel sound. So what would they install there? Remember, we are allowed to write 2 words here, so it could be an additional something, but they need to something they could install in the building. So we're thinking about facilities for a building, whether it's air conditioning or more electrical equipment. Words that relate to facilities, that's what we should listen for in number 29. Restrict personal use of something on computers. So what personal things do people use on computers? I guess they use web browsing, so personal web browsing, but also personal equipment. It could be things like USB drives. But do remember that in the last part of the tape that we heard, the teacher was complaining about the personal use of email. So anything related to email or social media would be a possibility for number 30. Okay, let's listen together to the next part of the tape.
Now, what about the computers? I think it might be a good idea to install some new models. They would take up a lot less room, and so that would increase the workspace for textbooks and so on.
That would be great. It is a bit cramped in there at times.
What about other resources? Do you have a list of things that the students would like to see improved?
Yes, one of the comments that students frequently make is that they find it difficult to find materials that are appropriate for their level, especially reading resources. So I think we need to label them more clearly.
Well, that's easy enough. We can get that organised very quickly. In fact, I think we should review all of the study resources, as some of them are looking a bit out of date.
Definitely. The CD section especially needs to be more current. I think we should get some of the ones that go with our latest course books and also make multiple copies.
Good. Now, I was also thinking about some different materials that we haven't got in there at all. What do you think of the idea of introducing some workbooks? If we break them up into separate pages and laminate them, they'd be a great resource. The students could study the main course book in class and then do follow-up practice in the Self-Access Centre.
That sounds good.
OK, now finally we need to think about how the room is used. I'll have to talk to the teachers and make sure we can all reach some agreement on a timetable to supervise the centre after class. But we also need to think about security too, especially if we're going to invest in some new equipment.
What about putting in an alarm?
Good idea. The other thing I'd like to do is talk to our technicians and see whether we could somehow limit the access to email. I really don't want to see that resource misused.
What about if we agree to only use it before and after class?
Yes, that would be fine. OK, anyway, that's great for now. We'll discuss it further when we've managed to sort.
That is the end of section 3.
Okay, so as we heard, doing some reading in advance and thinking about the vocabulary allowed us to make some predictions about, for example, installing facilities. Using the context of the last listening text allowed us to make a guess for number 30, which was correct. And we also had some good ideas about these ones. So let's go through now and check our answers for section 3. Okay, so 21 was C, it's an important part of their studies, correct. 22B, move the access centre elsewhere, correct. The student's main concern about using the library would be B, the difficulty in getting help, right. The Director of Studies is concerned about the difficulty in supervising the centre, correct. Let's look at number 25. 25 was reading, and I put reading. 26 was the CD collection, which is right. 27 was workbooks, which was right. And then use of the room. 28 was a timetable or schedule. So we thought about those phrases before, so we were ready and listening for when she did say timetable. 29 was an alarm, yes. And 30 was the personal use of email or emails, so that was right as well. If you had any problems with these, go back and listen again. You can use the YouTube subtitles if you're watching on a PC. So this was IELTS Textbook 9, Test number 2, Listening, Section 3. If you want to hear Listening Section 2, click here. If you want to hear the next section, Listening Section 4, click here. And don't forget, you can join us on Facebook to connect with other teachers and students and to share resources and advice about IELTS. Good luck with your revision, and see you again soon.